when I was little, if you wanted an animal, there were always, litters, unwanted litters, and they were mongrels. We used to call them Heinz 57s, the dogs. And I think cats have largely been unaffected until very recently by extreme conformation. But I think over those years, and I'm sure you will have seen it culturally there, if you wanted a puppy and you wanted one from a breeder, say you wanted a proper breed, then you'd have to, look in the newspaper, and it would take you weeks, and then you'd have to wait for the puppy to be born, and then you'd have to wait for it to be weaned. So getting a puppy through a breeder was a really long process. And it gave you lots of time. I've often likened getting a puppy to buying a gun or getting a tattoo. You need to have a cooling off period. You can't make those decisions on an impulse. And I think now we live in a generation where everyone can have what they want at the click of a button. There was a UK study done by the Kennel Club, I believe, that found that people spend longer choosing what shoes they're going to buy than what puppy they're going to buy. So we live in a situation where people can have whatever they want. And social media, I think, is a massive driver for that. So we have this really in-your-face celebrity culture. And I think cats have actually been one of the bigger victims of this, because, and this is all obviously personal opinion, but I always felt before that people often attention seek with their dogs because they're out and about with them. And I'm an absolute dog fanatic, and I would love it. I've always had mongrels, but I'd love it when people came up to me, and I used to be on a TV program that was really popular in the UK, and my dogs were featured in that program, and they got recognized in their own right when they were staying with my mum and dad. So people would come up to us and say, "Oh, I love your dogs. What sort of dogs are they?" And I'd always say, "Well, they're just mongrels. They're crossbreeds. They're just dogs." But I think people love, as a vet in practice, and I'm sure you will have had this, where people would come in and say, the one that sticks in my mind was an Italian Spinoni, which we didn't see very often when I was in practice. And the client was really, it's like, "Oh, I bet you've never seen an Italian Spinoni before." And I think now, because of the way social media, and particularly influencers on TikTok, and I've got 2 teenage girls, and TikTok's a massive thing, and Instagram and so on, that anytime a celebrity wants to, we're massive Taylor Swift fans in my house. And we went to see her last year, and I think she's a brilliant female role model. She's really strong. She's really political. She's really just very, very cool, I think, from a female point of view. But she's got Scottish fold cats that she loves, obviously, but there's pictures of them everywhere. And from a veterinary point of view, for someone who campaigns on extreme conformation, it's disastrous, because we've got Ed Sheeran here in the UK, who also, I think, has Scottish fold cats. There's people like The Rock, and big footballers who've all got bulldogs or French bulldogs. And it feels like in today's culture, people want the quirkiest pets because, well, attention seeking sounds horrible, but I think that's the sort of fundamental driver for it. People don't seem to be happy now to have a cat or a dog. Tried a couple of years ago, I've contacted a few celebrities on social media, and of course it's not them that you're contacting, but I would love to see, what I'd love to have is, say that she had a cat. I mean, someone as massive as Taylor Swift, if one of her cats has had the horrific arthritis that comes with the folded ears, it would be just great if we could just have someone that would say, "I bought this cat and I had no idea," and this is one of the biggest problems. People have no idea. So for the sake of anyone listening, the cartilage defect causes crippling arthritis. So you can't have the folded ear, and it's really common. So that there's a really high chance that she has had veterinary issues. And it would just be so great if we could get some really frank conversation from people who are influencers to say, listen, I made this mistake. I didn't do my research, and this is what's happened. And I'm not the animals that are out there need our care. But the point is that we need to try and stop producing more of them. And the more that we can have open, honest conversations about those medical issues, I think, the better. It is a big issue because, all the vets in practice, we're all globally now, there's a massive shortage of vets. So everyone's overworked, everyone's super tired. And often by the time we see an animal, the owner has already had hours with the breeder, and they've had all the advice, and they've had all the stuff from the kennel club about how great this breed is and everything else. And then they come to us for a first vaccination or a first examination. And usually we'll have 10 minutes, maybe 20 if you're lucky, to firstly undo a lot of the bad advice that's been given, like raw feeding and homeopathic vaccines, but that's a whole nother conversation. And broach then potential breed problems. And in the UK and Europe and the US now, French bulldogs are, I think, at least number one, if not, they're in the top 5 most popular breeds. And they are, riddled. Born to suffer is a strong term to use, but they're born to suffer. And so I think vets have really got to really try to go for pre-purchase advice, which I think is really difficult because everyone looks at the Kennel Club websites and the breed websites and the internet. And if it's your first dog, you wouldn't necessarily think to ask a vet before you got the dog. So I think practices, I know we're overworked, I just said, but if we can do things like offer a monthly slot or a weekly slot to a local radio station to do Q&As, people can ring in, but in return for that, you get to highlight a breed specific problem every time you're on. Or if you have, in the UK, like fun family dog shows are really popular, so dog with the waggiest tail, dog that looks most like its owner. Vet practices could have stands at those things to try and talk to people about it. But I think on the front line, it's about talking to the owner as if you're on the same team, because we should be on the same team. And instead of saying, oh, it's such a shame that you've decided to buy a French bulldog or a Sphinx or whatever it is to say, okay, I don't know if you're aware, but this breed is prone to a number of problems. So what we're going to do together is look out for those problems, and hopefully it won't happen to your animal, but this is what we're going to do. And you make it right from the outset, you're making them aware that they've not made a great choice, but that you're not judging. And the problem is, with the pre-purchase advice, as vets, I've spoken to loads of vets when I've presented at conferences, and they've come up to me afterwards and said, oh, I had, a friend or a family member who asked me whether I should get a French bulldog particularly. And they've said, good Lord, no, don't, whatever you do, don't get a French bulldog. And they listen to all the advice, veterinary advice from their friend or family, and then they go and do it anyway. So if our friends are ignoring our advice and our family are ignoring our advice, it's a real uphill battle to expect that prospective clients might listen. I've been campaigning about this for probably 25 years, and it's got worse in that time. It's been pretty depressing. But for me, I think the only way to tackle it is laws, because it's like smoking and drug taking and drink driving, and all the time that those animals are available to buy, we cannot blame people for buying them, because by the very nature of the fact that you can buy one implies that it's okay. So for me, and in the EU and the UK more less so, there are a lot of countries that have got laws, but there are huge problems with loopholes. There are huge problems with lack of enforcement, because with all the stuff that's going on in the world, you know, animal welfare often slips down the priority list. But I think I was involved with a big legislation mapping project in the EU, and enforcement's huge and loopholes are huge because we've got open borders, obviously, in a lot of the union. And I think personally that ownership bans are the way to go, because it doesn't single out breeds particularly. You could just say you are not allowed to have a cat that's got folded ears. Then it doesn't matter if you say, well, I imported it like that. You know, it was born like that. It was like that when I got it as a kitten. The same with mutilations, the same with cropping and tail docking. You know, we've got a huge problem in the UK with ear cropping coming back, which has been banished for about over 100 years. So we've got huge problems with that. But and people say, well, he was like that. So, or ban ownership. You know, defense, ignorance isn't a defense. That I see that as the only way that we can do it. We have a massive problem, and I don't know if it's the same there. We have a huge problem with suicide and depression in the veterinary profession in the UK and EU. And there's a lot of interesting research into why. But I personally think that for a lot of the vets who are in practice on a daily basis, extreme conformation has now become one of the biggest causes of moral injury and ethical conflict that the newest vets are facing. And I've been contacted a lot over the years because of, you know, I set up Vets Against Brachycephalism so that vets would have a chance to sort of speak out and add their voice to these kinds of campaigns. I think that a lot of vets who are in practice feel that they are too insignificant to make a difference. So, and this, I think that actually one of the things that could really help us would be our governing bodies. So I spoke to the Royal College here, and they said it's really difficult because they get a lot of criticism from vets already for them being too prescriptive about what we can and can't do, which I hadn't really considered. But I think there was a guy in Wales who brought out a practice policy that's now been rolled out to a lot of different practices. So they decided that their whole group was not going to have any assisted fertility for any brachycephalic dogs. So I think there's so many small differences that vets can make, so they can have individual conversations with clients. And over the years, you know, I wanted to change the world and I wanted to do all this great stuff. And you have to, in the end, if one person listens to one podcast that I do and decides not to buy a French Bulldog, and it's one at a time, then so be it. Because they all have this ripple effect. So they can I think vets can talk to clients and try and persuade them not to do things and not to get another one if they've already got one. I think they can sign up to campaigns like Vets Against Brachycephalism. Practice policies, I think way more practices. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but the culturally has very, very changed since I was qualified, because we have big corporates now. And when I left university, you weren't allowed to have a practice that wasn't owned by a vet. And that's all changed. So now there are virtually no independent veterinary practices in the UK. But corporates have got a real opportunity, I think, they will have practice policies on so many things: health and safety, what drugs you can buy, surgical procedures. So why not have, I'd love to see one of the big corporates in the UK. It's Linnaeus and Vet Partners, and that I can't remember. There's so many now, but if one of them said, right, we're across our group, 500 practices, we are not doing any assisted fertility for brachycephalic dogs. That one individual vet that talks to their ethical review board, that talks to their policymakers, that then rolls out to a corporate group. The thing is, the veterinary world is very competitive, but the fundamentals of everything we do is animal welfare. And I think it's really easy for that to get lost. And the fact that big practices or small practices don't have ethical meetings every 2 months to say, are we doing anything here that people are feeling conflicted about? Because none of them do. And all of those things would just have this staggering effect where at the end of it, the ripples are just huge by just taking those steps. I think the governing bodies, so when the Royal College said, it's difficult because people are upset with us all the time anyway. I think for vets who are on the front lines, so say your practice doesn't have a policy on things you are and aren't allowed to do, like tail docking or those kind of things. If our governing bodies said, so recently, well, fairly recently in the last few years in the UK, it used to be okay for vets to do surgical insemination. So not just artificial insemination, but surgical for those difficult bitches who cannot reproduce naturally, so shouldn't be reproducing. So the Royal College said that it was professional misconduct to undergo, for a bitch to undergo surgical insemination. So I think if some of the governing bodies, if they were stronger and said, in the UK, for example, it became a professional misconduct to tail dock. If they put more of those things in place, it takes the pressure off the vet who's on the front line. So if someone asks you to do pre-mate blood testing for an English bulldog that's probably already got clinical signs of BOAS, and you want to say no, in that clinic situation, that puts you in direct conflict with that client. And it can be a really scary situation, particularly for recent graduates. But if you can say, well, I'm really sorry, I would love to do that for you, but I could get struck off because it's professional misconduct, according to the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. That puts all of the onus on, the big bad guy who's 20 steps behind that vet. And I think those kind of things from governing bodies could be really useful. I think being outspoken is something that vets are very bad at. And I mean, I was quite lucky because I had that media exposure in my sort of first 10 years in practice. And I have had a massive amount of abuse over the years, to the point that I nearly stopped everything, which is much less now, almost non-existent, because everyone's saying the same as me. It felt like I was the only one before, but I think that, it was in the 60s, WSAVA, the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, came out with a statement that said that extreme conformation should be consigned to history, that we shouldn't be breeding animals that are born to suffer. And 50, 60 years later, it's got worse. And I think for me, a lot of our veterinary organisations, not necessarily just the governing bodies, but things like BSAVA, WSAVA, BVA, all the, your ones who would be the big ones, NAVC and,
BVMA.
Yeah, we should have veterinary organizations should be absolutely unequivocal about this. You know, we have in the UK, there's a group of organizations, some of which are veterinary, some of which aren't, called the Brachycephalic Working Group. And they've done some stuff, but their tagline is stop and think before you buy a flat-faced dog, or think before you buy a flat-faced dog. And you know, they're sort of pushing for this tagline to be rolled out. And it's like, hang on, this is the strongest thing you can come up with, is think before you buy one. Doesn't imply that you shouldn't buy one. You know, why is their tagline not do not buy a flat-faced dog? And I think a lot of it's difficult, because I think member associations, they obviously have to try and represent the views of all of their members. And as vets, we all know that there are lots of vets who've got really different opinions to me and really different opinions from other people. So how do member associations? But for me, it comes back to this fact that animal welfare should trump everything. So there's unequivocal evidence that flat-faced animals really suffer. So why do those membership bodies, all right, so you might lose some members, you know, if you're setting yourself up as a bastion organization for the health and welfare of animals, that should be your bottom line, not your membership revenue. So yeah. As a whole, globally, I think one of our biggest, and this is what I say in all the conferences that I speak at, veterinary ones, we are a very small global profession in the scheme of things, and we have a real opportunity to speak as a global voice, to say, I mean, Vets Against Brachycephalism has vets on it from 66 countries, I think, and organizations signed up that represent hundreds of thousands of vets all over the world. And I think we miss a lot of opportunities as a global profession to just get together with the brightest minds in that sphere and say, do you know what? No, this isn't acceptable, because it isn't acceptable. You cannot breed a cat that has no fur, no whiskers, and no legs, which the new Dwelf bully cats, or whatever they're being called. That cat is incapable of having a cat's life. And to me, that is tangible suffering that is equivalent to being beaten on a daily basis. So how can we as a profession not be shouting from the rooftops to lawmakers that this is absolutely unconscionable, the same as drink driving into a family on a sidewalk? The fact that we're so silent is really upsetting to me. I was in practice when tail docking got banned in the UK. There were exceptions, obviously, because everyone loves a loophole. And I had a boxer breeder who was a client, and I'd always been pretty diplomatic about I mean, I'd never done it. I don't know where she got them docked. She always came to us for everything else. Maybe she was still doing it herself, I don't know. But when I said to her one day, you know, this is going to be illegal soon for boxers, and she said, well, I'm going to stop breeding. I'm going to stop breeding them because I can't abide a boxer with a tail. And then a sentence that really stuck with me, she said, all of the ornaments in my house have got no tails. So she obviously had one of those houses that was just full of boxer, like clay figures. And that was one of the first things she said. I will stop breeding. I can't abide a boxer with a tail. And what am I going to do? All of the ornaments in my house have got no tails. But the flip side of that is that I had another client who bred Austrian cattle dogs, and some of them are born bobtailed, the same as corgis, and the rest of them were docked to make the normal ones look like the abnormal ones, like ridgebacks, etc. All the madness of breeding. I mean, the breeding world is full of madness. So she carried on breeding, but she took it on board. She stopped having them docked, obviously. And a couple of months later, I saw her with a litter of puppies, and she said, I can't believe we've done that all these years. She said the difference in the puppies is unbelievable. She said that they've thrived. I mean, they must have this massive stunt in growth because of the surgical trauma and the pain, chronic pain. She said they balance better, they play. When they stand up to play fight together, they don't fall over because they use their tails. She said she felt awful that she'd done it. She was absolutely mortified. I think in the past, when I've said that we shouldn't be breeding brachycephalics, or I mean, brachycephalics get all of the media attention, but extreme conformation affects dozens of species and dozens of breeds of dog. And people think that I'm just saying we've got to kill all the brachycephalic dogs. Well, I'm not. You know, our job as vets is to look after the animals in our care. So if all of the animals that are deformed and diseased, we are going to care for them the best we can. And we will have to euthanize some of them because their life is unbearable. And that's part of our job. But the whole point is that if we don't tackle the issue, those adoption centres will stay full forever because people will keep breeding them. So if you put across the message and say some dogs who would be adopted don't get adopted, you will have a negative impact on the welfare of some animals. But the longer term impact of that messaging will save millions, and that's not an over exaggeration given the exponential growth in popularity of those animals. If people stop buying them, the demand goes down, you will improve animal welfare exponentially in reverse. So in reverse of that trend of suffering, if you see what I mean. So yes, any change like that, there will be a period of readjustment. No one's saying nuke all the shelter dogs. And I think in the US, you've probably got a lot more kill shelters than we have in the UK. So that's happening already. Your adoption centres are already full of those dogs. So let's get the messaging out there, stop people buying them in the first place, because it's the people buying them that are relinquishing them more than it's the breeders. You know, we have to cut off the demand for those dogs. And then, because the adoption crisis isn't going to abate until people stop wanting to buy them in the first place. You know, people look at me and they say, oh, you hate pedigree animals. Like, well, I always wanted to say to clients, would you like an inbred animal or a pedigree one? And they'd all say, oh, I definitely don't want an inbred one. I want a pedigree one. It's like, yeah, they're the most inbred animals you can find on the planet. They don't exist in nature. Breeds do not exist in nature. So say I had my way and you took out maybe 40 breeds of dog that you said we weren't allowed to breed anymore. You've still got 200 breeds of dogs that are healthier. I'd love everyone just to have mongrels like we used to have when I was a kid. I don't see the need for breeds. What we need are good tempered family pets. We should be breeding for health and temperament, and looks should come after that. Dogs are lovely animals. This whole obsession with breed is insane. So it's just, you know, if you want a certain breed of dog, fine. Just pick from the 200 that are incapable of having a normal dog's life. the main, for me, I guess, take home messages are, from a veterinary profession point of view, don't be afraid to speak up. Because, I mean, we're the key to it, aren't we? It shouldn't be politicians who are listened to. It shouldn't be vocal minorities like the Kennel Club and the breeders. It should be the vets. If any government wants an opinion on animal welfare, it should be us that provides it. And it should be us that provides it really strongly with an evidence base. And that is not lacking when it comes to extreme conformation.